And now, these three remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. I love us. I love being Edgecomb Community Church with you, being a small church with a big heart, growing together. I read something about the church 25 years ago or so that has stuck with me. I think I read it in Brian McLaren's book called A New Kind of Christian, where a couple of the characters in the book, they're talking about the church, like the Christian church, and whether or not church is relevant anymore in a postmodern secular world. And one of them says the church is kind of like Noah's Ark, the boat with all the animals and and all their, shall we call them, aromas crowded together in the midst of a world destroying flood. The church is kind of like Noah's Ark. Sometimes it smells like shit, but it's the only thing around that floats. I don't think that that's exactly true. It is true that the Christian church is and often has been a stinking mess, but I don't think it's true that the church is the only reliable source of buoyancy in the midst of our chaotic and our unruly world. There is a wealth of beautiful wisdom traditions in our world that are worthy paths of spiritual formation, that guide us toward our best selves and our best contributions to a more peaceful and just and loving world. The Christian church, it's not the only thing that floats, but when it's being what it's supposed to be, even imperfectly, it does keep us afloat in the flood of our days. And beyond buoyancy, the church is also a staging area for recreating worlds after the floodwaters recede. That is what the Christian church is meant to be. We don't always get it right, we often don't, but when we do, it's because a bunch of curious, committed souls show up, guided by the spirit of possibility and creativity, to not only proclaim, but to demonstrate loving acts of good news to the world. Man, I'm so excited to be preaching this sermon because I want to share with you what it means, particularly to be part of our church, this small church with the big heart in Edgecomb, Maine. And for those of you who are regulars, this message might serve as a reminder and a rallying call, but I'm preaching this primarily for our friends and our neighbors, those of you who are curious about our church. And I'm glad to be recording this message as a video because I want for those of you who are part of our church to be able to easily share it with others who might be interested in joining our community as well. All right, so for any of you who might be interested in joining, what I'm going to do here is share three things out of a commitment to being as clear as possible about who we are and what we're up to. First, I'll share a little bit about being part of our denomination, the United Church of Christ, which we sometimes call the UCC. Then I'm going to share with you what I think it means to be an intentionally inclusive Christian church. And then I'll close out by sharing some of the things that we specifically value as a congregation in Edgecomb. Okay, so above all else, a church is a community where open-hearted people gather to practice belonging, to grow together spiritually, to listen for the guidance of the divine, and then to act on that guidance in personal and in collective ways. Our church is part of the United Church of Christ tradition. Though the singular word tradition is kind of a misnomer because there are a number of streams of tradition, various streams that have been gathered together into the United Church of Christ. And in the network of communities that make up the UCC, there are a host of different ways that people identify with their faith. It's really hard to pin us down with a precise creed or church culture, and that's purposeful. We call ourselves the United Church of Christ, but that kind of makes it sound like we've got all our differences sorted. And that's not the case. We might more aptly be called the uniting church of Christ, committed to the ongoing and often challenging work of communing with each other smack dab in the midst of our differences. UCC is a confluence of traditions that is often experienced, and I love this about us, as a safe harbor for queer Christians and for recovering evangelicals, for former Catholics, for current Catholics, for Unitarians considering Christ, for people who like hymns and social progress, for people who grew up going to church and still kind of enjoy it, for people whose grandparents grew up going to church, who love the traditions, who have always done it this way, and who are nevertheless open to exploring new ways as well. In the United Church of Christ, we have a practice of inviting people to formally become members of their local church. That's something we do at our church in Edgecomb. In mid-October, we'll be holding a service where we welcome new members. Different local churches welcome new members in different ways. But my understanding of what it means to be a member of our church is three things: that we, one, share certain values, and I'll speak more to those in a bit. Two, we show up consistently to make a contribution of time, of talent, and of our treasure as well. A contribution, not one that's prescribed, but that is personally significant. A contribution that supports and embodies the work of the church. And third, that we do all of this following in the way of Jesus. And that last point, I want to speak to that a little more. As I said before, there are many wonderful ways in our world to be in transformational spiritual community, many wisdom traditions and religious pathways with rich guidance. The Christian pathway is the one that we devote ourselves to as a community. That doesn't mean that we don't learn from other paths, and it doesn't mean that some in our community aren't committed to other paths as well, but as a historically and actively Christian community, we gather particularly to learn from and follow the wisdom way of Jesus. And so what does it mean to follow the way of Jesus? Honestly, that's kind of the question that we show up each week to explore together. I chose two passages from the Bible. If you're with us at church, then you just heard them read. If you're watching this later, then you can read them in the video notes. And these passages, they serve as a solid on-ramp to that continuous process of exploring what it means to follow the way of Jesus. First, in Luke chapter 4, there's a passage that tells about Jesus giving his personal mission statement. He said, "The Spirit of God is on me because God has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. God has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and clarity for those who can't find their way, and to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of God's favor." Following Jesus means actively engaging in the world in ways that bring about these tangible experiences of liberation. And then 1 Corinthians chapter 13, which comes from back when the Christian path was first being organized, where one of the early church leaders wrote beautifully, poetically, profoundly, and insistently that verifiable acts of love are at the very root of our faith. So a question that often comes up: to follow Jesus as a member of this church, do you need to believe certain things about God or subscribe to certain doctrines or creeds? In our approach, there is no rigid formulation of doctrine or attachment to creeds or structures. Instead, go ahead and ask yourself this: do your beliefs Do your beliefs make you obnoxious or even dangerous? Or instead, do they inspire you to love? As I preached last week, what you say you believe is less important than how you relate to people and show up in community as a result of what you believe. There's still accountability and commitment in our life together. That's important. But as for creeds and belief statements, well, our overarching creed is love. Another thing that following Jesus means at Edgecomb Community Church is that we do Christian things. We gather for worship. We study Scripture. We pray together. We take communion and celebrate baptism. And these practices and these rituals are about above all else being a community of open-hearted people gathered in the spirit of belonging to grow together and to listen for God's guidance and to courageously and lovingly act on that guidance, both personally and also together. So here's an interesting question. Does all this mean that you have to be a Christian in order to follow Jesus and in order to belong as a member of our community? So most of our members are Christians or come from Christian backgrounds. But none of us are reduced to one part of our identity. I consider myself to be a curious, sometimes agnostic, yet practicing Christian animist with a penchant for wild places. So yeah, I'm a Christian. But saying that doesn't mean much unless you unpack what it means to you. It's less important whether or not you identify as a Christian, and more important, what it means for you that you do, or what it means for you if you don't. Whatever your religious identity is or isn't, the important thing here is your commitment to living for love and justice, seeking as Jesus did and as the Spirit empowers us to do, seeking to liberate the world and our own hearts from forces of oppression. All right. So now that we have a sense of what it means to follow Jesus, I want to share 7 of the values that I see our church, Edgecomb Community Church in particular, holding, sharing, living out. And here they are. We value being a church that inspires and supports community. This is summed up in our official mission statement. Our mission as a congregation is to bring together our communities in spirituality and loving service to humankind. We value being a church with a long history. As one of our church historians wrote, there have been a continuous line of dedicated men and women who came before us, making sacrifices of time and money so that our generation and the ones to follow might have a special place in which to gather for worship. There have been people gathering in our church building to share in the life of faith since the 1880s. We're stewards of the gift of worship space and tradition that those who have gone before us left to us. And we also trust that our predecessors would want us to slingshot beyond anything that they might have imagined. So along with being a church with a long history, we're a church with an expanding vision and with faith in the future. We value being a church with a diversity of opinions and needs and abilities and voices, and we desire even more diversity than we currently have. This is a funny one because it dawned on me that one of the ways that this value plays out is that not everyone in our church necessarily agrees with everything that I'm telling you about our church. How great is that? We value being a church that is open and affirming. We acknowledge and affirm the equal value of people of all ages, of all races, of all nationalities, ethnicities, cultures, sexual orientations, gender identities, and expressions, regardless of physical, mental, or emotional abilities, family structures, faith backgrounds, or social or economic circumstances. We believe that all people are created in the image of God and have vital contributions to make to the family of God. And together, we strive to honor the great commandments to love God with all our heart, soul, and mind, and to love our neighbors as ourselves. We value being a church where questions and doubts are allowed and even encouraged. Doubt is not the opposite of faith. Certainty is the opposite of faith, which isn't to say that you won't find strong convictions among us, because you will. But in our convictions, we aim to remain curious. And in our conflicts, we aim to remain loving. We value being a church that grows together, deep and wide. Yes, we want to increase the number of members and participants who come regularly to services and offerings of our church, but we also want to grow in the depth of our own spiritual maturity, knowing that wherever there are two or more of us gathered, the Spirit of God moves among us as a growing community. And we value being a church that is open to change, which is precisely what happens when new and more people bring their contributions into community. We change. We take new forms. We take new shapes. And we help to change our world for the better as a result. You know that Margaret Mead quote? Never doubt the small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. That's what we're up to here at Edgecomb Community Church, a small church with a great big heart, growing together in the way of Jesus to help change the world. I believe every one of you is on a journey of faith and curiosity with purpose for your one wild and precious life. And whether you're in a place where you're interested in joining us as a church member, that's great. Let me know. Or maybe where you're at, you'd like to just show up some Sunday for a worship service, or come join us for one of our community meals, or come walk the outdoor labyrinth, also great. I'm eager to connect with you. We are eager to connect with you and to hear your story and to experience what it's like to be the church with you